Have you ever kept a family secret for decades? I won't ask what, just curious.
You know that gut punch feeling when you have poured every ounce of your energy into keeping the world steady for your family only to return home after a grueling day and discover that the very people who should have your back have turned your children's sanctuary into a staging ground for someone else's privileges, and in that moment, everything inside you shifts from weary endurance to a calculated resolve that promises they will regret underestimating the quiet strength you have been building all along. That was precisely what unfolded for me, Sarah Thompson, a 42-year-old marketing manager in suburban Dayton, Ohio, who had spent the better part of 14 hours hunched over her desk in a fluorescent-lit office battling deadlines and difficult clients just to secure a deal that might finally ease the financial strain of raising 2 kids on a single income after my ex-husband Tom decided 4 years ago that his career in Chicago was more important than the family we had built together. I had texted my parents, Robert and Linda, around 9 o'clock that evening to let them know I would be running late again because the project demanded my full attention, and they had graciously offered to watch my 10-year-old daughter Mia with her wild curls and insatiable curiosity, along with my 8-year-old son Jack, whose gangly limbs and boundless energy usually filled our modest 2-story home with the kind of joyful chaos that made all the overtime worthwhile. And by the time I pulled into the driveway just past 11:30, the streetlights cast long shadows that mirrored the exhaustion weighing down my shoulders as I kicked off my heels and pushed open the front door, expecting the familiar sounds of bedtime routines or perhaps the dog's enthusiastic tail-wagging greeting, but instead encountering a silence so thick and unnatural it immediately set my instincts on edge. What greeted me in the living room was a scene straight out of a nightmare I never knew I had, where my parents sat perched on the couch with expressions of self-satisfied accomplishment, as if they had just completed some heroic family service, while my children huddled together on the floor, surrounded by unfamiliar boxes and discarded belongings that spoke volumes about the invasion they had endured in my absence. Mia clutched her favorite stuffed bear, the one with the slightly lopsided button eye that she had painstakingly sewn back on herself during a rainy afternoon craft session we shared just last month, now looking small and insignificant next to a gleaming new set of toy trucks, all shiny chrome and oversized plastic, designed clearly for a younger child, perhaps half of Jack's age, while Jack's beloved collection of building blocks and action figures, the ones we had used to construct elaborate forts during lazy weekends, were unceremoniously shoved into black trash bags piled in the corner as though they were worthless clutter unworthy of space in our home. The air carried the faint scent of baby powder and fresh linens, mingling with the remnants of our earlier dinner, suggesting that this overhaul had been methodical and unapologetic, and when I finally found my voice amid the rising tide of anger, it came out steadier than I felt inside, where a storm was brewing with the intensity of a Midwestern thunderstorm ready to unleash its fury. My mother looked up from her spot on the couch, her face framed by the lace-trimmed blouse she always wore for what she considered important family occasions, and offered an explanation that dripped with misplaced justification as she gestured toward the new arrivals, saying, "Oh, Sarah, honey, we did not want to disturb you when you got home because Emily dropped off little Tyler's old things, well, not exactly old, but certainly upgraded ones from his nursery remodel, and we thought, why let such quality items go to waste when your children already have so much accumulated over the years. But Tyler, he is just a baby starting fresh after his mother's challenges, and he truly deserves every bit of comfort we can provide in this transition." Deserves comfort, as if my own children, who had learned to share a single bedroom not by choice, but by the practicalities of my budget after Tom's departure, did not merit the same consideration or respect for the life we had carved out together through late nights and weekend hustles. And my father nodded along with his usual gruff agreement, fiddling with the frames of his glasses that had fogged slightly from the emotional undercurrents in the room, while muttering something about how family obligations always come first, especially when Emily's recent divorce had left her scrambling to provide stability for her 2-year-old son Tyler, who had somehow become the undisputed center of their universe, despite my own efforts to keep Mia and Jack thriving amid the uncertainties of single parenthood. Emily, my younger sister by 5 years, the one who had always glided through life on a wave of charm, good looks, and our parents' endless interventions, had once again positioned her needs at the forefront, turning what should have been a simple babysitting favor into an act of blatant favoritism that disregarded the emotional toll it took on my kids. And as Mia lifted her tear-streaked face to meet my gaze, whispering in a voice choked with confusion and hurt that they had called our things junk, as if our shared history and simple joys were disposable, I felt a profound ache deep in my chest, mingling with the sharp edge of betrayal, because these were the same grandparents who had promised unwavering support, yet chose this moment to prioritize their golden child's convenience over the well-being of my little ones. Jack buried his face against my leg, his small body trembling with silent sobs that cut through me more sharply than any boardroom critique ever could, and in that instant something fundamental shifted within me, transforming the exhaustion of the day into a focused determination that would not be swayed by guilt or tradition. A smile began to form on my lips, not the warm, nurturing one I reserved for bedtime stories and scraped knees, but the calculated, professional one I deployed during high-stakes negotiations, where I had learned to mask strategy behind civility. And as I knelt down to envelop Mia and Jack in a protective embrace, while gently instructing them to help me reopen those trash bags and reclaim their space, I declared in a tone that carried both finality and an undercurrent of promise, "Pack up, we are done here," leaving my parents momentarily frozen in confusion as they mistook my words for mere frustration over the toys rather than the opening salvo in a larger reckoning that had been simmering beneath the surface for far longer than they realized. They believed I was simply overreacting in the dramatic way they had always accused me of being ever since I was the teenager, stepping up with after-school jobs to help cover household expenses while Emily pursued her artistic whims without a care. But little did they know that my declaration marked the beginning of a plan I had been quietly assembling piece by piece through late-night side hustles in online consulting and meticulous financial tracking that positioned me to respond not with tears or pleas, but with actions that would expose the imbalances they had fostered for years. As I guided the children upstairs to their room, tucking them in with whispered assurances of special treats and adventures come morning to mend the cracks in their trust, one overheard my father whispering to my mother in the hallway below about how I needed to calm down and remember the importance of family unity. But calm was the last thing on my mind, because while they shuffled out the door with awkward apologies and half-hearted offers to fix the misunderstanding, I retreated to the kitchen, where the glow of my laptop screen illuminated the next subtle move in my strategy. With a few swift keystrokes, I composed and sent an email to the family group chat, the one reserved for coordinating holidays and shared celebrations, announcing that Thanksgiving at our house would unfortunately be canceled this year due to an unexpected work commitment, meaning the kids and I would be forging our own path with alternative plans that did not involve the usual gatherings where my mother could reign over the table, dispensing her biased affections. It was not an outright explosion, but a precise incision designed to sting where it mattered most, because I knew how those traditions anchored her sense of control and authority within our dynamic. And as I hit send, a quiet chuckle escaped me at the thought of her reaction, the witty undercurrent of my words masking the deeper intent to disrupt the status quo without revealing my full hand just yet. They remained utterly oblivious to the fact that this was merely the first thread I was pulling from the tapestry of their expectations, one that I had begun unraveling months earlier during sleepless nights when resentment had evolved into resolve. And as I finally climbed into bed, the weight of the evening settling like a fog, I could not shake the nagging pull of the envelope my father had absent-mindedly left on the counter amid the chaos, some collection of old family papers he claimed to have been sorting through for his own records, and though fatigue tugged at my eyelids, my fingers itched with curiosity, wondering what hidden truths might lie within those faded pages that could either confirm my suspicions or upend everything I thought I knew about the loyalties binding us together. Sleep proved elusive that night as the echoes of my children's quiet sobs mingled with the relentless replay of my parents' justifications in my mind, turning what should have been a restful escape into a restless vigil where every creak of the house seemed to whisper accusations and unresolved tensions that had festered long before this particular betrayal unfolded in our living room. By the time dawn filtered through the curtains casting a pale light on the disarray we had partially restored upstairs, I had already decided to tuck that mysterious envelope away beneath a pile of utility bills on my nightstand, not quite ready to confront whatever family relics it might contain, because delving into the past felt too much like inviting more ghosts into an already crowded present. But the damage from the evening lingered palpably as Mia and Jack stirred with a subdued energy that morning, their usual morning chatter replaced by tentative glances and questions about whether Grandma and Grandpa would come back to take away more of their things, which forced me to summon a reassuring smile while flipping blueberry pancakes on the griddle, their favorite treat, meant to rebuild a sense of normalcy and security in the wake of the intrusion, even as I silently vowed to shield them from further incursions into our fragile routine. Work beckoned with its unyielding demands, another 12-hour marathon of conference calls and strategy sessions that left little room for emotional processing, so I dropped the kids at school with extra hugs and promises of an after-school adventure to the local park where we could reclaim some joy away from familial judgments, and by the time I dragged myself home in the late afternoon, the weight of the day, compounded by the unresolved confrontation, had my shoulders knotted tighter than a poorly tied budget spreadsheet. Yet there they were, my parents, waiting on the front porch with arms crossed and expressions that blended righteous indignation with a veneer of concern, as if they were the ones who had been slighted by my abrupt dismissal the night before. We settled into the living room where the faint traces of baby powder still hung in the air like an unwelcome reminder, and my mother launched into her defense with that familiar blend of saccharine tone and underlying reproach, explaining how they had only intended to help by redistributing Emily's upgrades because our home always seemed so cluttered with the accumulations of everyday life, whereas Tyler, as a vulnerable toddler navigating his mother's post-divorce upheavals, truly needed the stability and comfort of familiar high-quality items to ease his transition into whatever uncertain future lay ahead. My father chimed in with his characteristic gruffness, adjusting his glasses repeatedly as he elaborated on the sacred principle of family solidarity, emphasizing that blood ties demanded sacrifices, especially when Emily had reached out in tears about her financial strains following her separation from Tyler's father, who had vanished without so much as a backward glance, leaving her to shoulder the burdens alone, and how I of all people should understand the importance of stepping up, since I had always been cast in the role of the dependable one, the strong sibling who managed without complaint while Emily required the gentle nurturing to flourish. That narrative grated against the raw edges of my own history, because ever since I was 16 and the factory where Dad worked shuttered its doors, forcing me to pick up after-school shifts at the local diner to help keep the lights on, Emily had been indulged with art supplies and weekend getaways that I could only dream of, while I absorbed lectures on self-reliance and the virtues of hard work without ever receiving the same leeway for my own aspirations. And now here they were patting my hand with patronizing sympathy, suggesting that I simply needed to let go of the drama for the sake of the grandchildren, as though prioritizing Tyler's whims over Mia and Jack's emotional security constituted some profound act of generosity, rather than a blatant disregard for the efforts I poured into maintaining our household on a marketing manager's salary that barely covered braces and soccer fees after Tom's abandonment 4 years prior. I swallowed the torrent of resentment bubbling up inside me, the stories of countless times I had loaned Emily cash for her fleeting pursuits only to watch it evaporate on manicures and impulse buys, or how Mom's holiday newsletters brimmed with effusive praise for Tyler's every milestone, while my hard-won promotions merited a passing mention at best, and instead I nodded along, allowing them to believe their words had landed while steering the conversation towards safer territories like Dad's upcoming routine checkup at the clinic or Mom's latest triumphs with her community garden club. That way I could buy time to let the internal gears of my response mechanism turn without erupting into the kind of scene they would label as hysterical. Once they departed with assurances of future harmony that rang hollow in my ears, I seized a moment while the kids napped off their school fatigue to log into the shared family savings account, an arrangement Dad had established years ago ostensibly for collective emergencies, but sustained largely through my consistent deposits, since Emily's contributions were as sporadic as her commitments, and with a few deliberate clicks I transferred out my portion, reallocating it directly into a dedicated college fund exclusively for Mia and Jack, framing the transaction in the account notes as a necessary step toward prioritizing my immediate family's long-term comfort, a phrase laced with just enough ironic bite to elicit a private smirk because I could already imagine the confusion it would sow when they next checked the balance, mistaking it perhaps for some administrative error rather than the first tangible shift in power dynamics. The escalation truly ignited that evening when Emily arrived unannounced, her 2-year-old Tyler balanced on one hip with his cherubic face and wide eyes that masked the privileges he enjoyed as the family's darling, and she swept into the house with apologies that felt scripted from a daytime talk show, cooing over Mia and Jack in a display of sisterly affection that did little to erase the sting of her indirect role in the previous night's upheaval. We gathered around the kitchen table over hastily brewed coffee, the children dispatched to the backyard with snacks to give us space for the candid exchange, and Emily confessed that she had not anticipated the misunderstanding arising from dropping off Tyler's outgrown items, but that Mom and Dad had insisted on making the swap to help her clear space amid her ongoing struggles with the divorce proceedings and living arrangements. And as she detailed the mounting pressures of single motherhood, I felt a flicker of genuine empathy, because beneath her polished exterior, Emily was not entirely the villain, just a product of years of enabling that had blinded her to the collateral damage she inflicted on others. Yet, when she pivoted to underscore how I must comprehend the urgency of providing Tyler with unwavering stability given my own vaunted independence, her words carried an undercurrent of condescension, implying that my self-sufficiency was somehow a deficiency rather than the armor I had forged through necessity. That calculated smile returned to my face, the one honed in corporate battles, and I responded by affirming our shared understanding while casually referencing the updated family chat where I had suggested reallocating the holiday fund to cover essentials like Tyler's new wardrobe if needed, a fabrication that masked my earlier financial maneuver but delivered with enough lighthearted sarcasm to make her pause and reassess the ground shifting beneath her assumptions, causing her cheeks to flush as she realized I was no longer content to absorb the imbalances without pushback. As she departed after an overly prolonged hug that spoke of her unease, I wrestled with the dilemma of whether to reach out to Tom, my ex, whose occasional child support checks arrived like clockwork, but whose emotional absence left a void. Perhaps confiding in him about the favoritism could prompt more substantial involvement or extra funds to bolster our defenses, yet involving him risked reopening wounds from our split, and admitting vulnerabilities I preferred to handle solo, a choice that might strike some as stubbornly prideful, bordering on neglectful of potential alliances, but in that moment it felt like the only way to preserve the autonomy I had fought so hard to maintain for myself and the kids. Just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the yard, my phone vibrated with an incoming voicemail from Emily, her voice stripped of its usual poise, trembling with urgency as she alluded to matters she had kept hidden from our parents. Something about the true extent of her financial entanglements that could unravel everything if exposed, leaving me staring at the screen with a pulse quickening in anticipation of what fractures might finally be spiderwebbing through her carefully constructed facade. Emily's voicemail lingered in my thoughts like an unanswered riddle throughout the night, her words laced with a vulnerability that clashed against the image of the poised sister I had always known, prompting me to replay it several times before drifting into a fitful sleep, where dreams tangled family obligations with the spreadsheets of my workday, leaving me waking with a resolve to address her plea on my own terms without rushing into revelations that could complicate the delicate balance I was already navigating amid escalating tensions and professional pressures. Work transformed into an unrelenting beast that week, with deadlines cascading like dominoes, each one demanding revisions and client approvals that stretched my hours into the evening, forcing me to rely on after-school programs for Mia and Jack longer than usual, a compromise that gnawed at my conscience, because while I knew the financial stability it promised was crucial for their future, the fleeting moments of absence meant I missed the small triumphs like Jack's soccer practice goals or Mia's latest school project unveilings. Yet in the midst of this grind, I managed to carve out a Friday afternoon detour to the local discount store where I stocked up on puzzles and art supplies tailored specifically to the kids' interests, transforming their play area into a personalized haven free from the shadow of hand-me-down comparisons, and watching their faces light up as they unpacked the new treasures eased some of the guilt, even if it could not fully erase the wariness that had taken root after the initial betrayal. My mother's texts arrived daily, cloaked in passive-aggressive concern, inquiring about reconciliation efforts and subtly reminding me of the upcoming family obligations, while my father placed a single call midweek, his voice gruff with unspoken accusations about the dip in the shared savings account, which I deflected with feigned surprise, attributing it to possible bank errors or overlooked fees before pivoting the discussion to his health concerns, a tactic that bought me breathing room without escalating into outright confrontation, allowing me to maintain the facade of harmony even as I plotted the next measured steps in reclaiming control over our narrative. The true unraveling of pretenses began to surface during Sunday dinner at my parents' colonial-style home in the suburbs, a place steeped in memories from my childhood, where the creaky porch swing had once been a refuge from sibling rivalries and parental expectations, now serving as the backdrop for what promised to be a tense gathering under the guise of mending fences, with the aroma of pot roast wafting through the air alongside an array of side dishes that my mother prepared with meticulous care as her way of exerting influence over the emotional landscape. Emily was present, of course, with Tyler ensconced in his high chair babbling incoherently, while the rest of us navigated the conversation's early pleasantries, exchanging light anecdotes about Dad's comical fishing escapades from the previous weekend or Emily's most recent attempt at a craft fair booth that had yielded more enthusiasm than sales, which elicited chuckles around the table, fostering a temporary illusion of unity until the discourse inevitably shifted toward Tyler's prodigious developments, with Emily beaming as she described his early attempts at reading simple words, a narrative that overshadowed Mia's recent straight-A report card, which went unmentioned despite her proud presentation of it earlier that week, and I felt the familiar burn of exclusion rising within me, questioning yet again why I continued to subject myself and the children to these gatherings where subtle digs about my hectic schedule contrasted sharply with the praise lavished on Emily's supposed ability to cultivate meaningful family moments, despite her part-time retail job that afforded her more flexibility than my corporate ladder climb ever would. Dessert brought the pivotal twist when my father casually broached the topic of downsizing their home, mentioning in passing that selling the property might provide the necessary funds to support Emily's fresh start amid her ongoing adjustments, a revelation that caused my fork to hover midway to my mouth, because that very house, with its familiar layout and equity built partly on my co-signature during a refinance years ago when I had stepped in to bolster their loan approval, now loomed as potential collateral for her instabilities. And as Emily's eyes flickered toward me before darting away, my mother swiftly redirected the focus to Tyler's impending preschool enrollment, filling the air with details of his bright future that masked the undercurrents of financial maneuvering. Overwhelmed by the implications, I excused myself under the pretense of freshening up, retreating to the bathroom where the cool tile grounded me momentarily, but as I lingered, the muffled voices from the hallway carried through the door, revealing Emily's hushed urgency to my father about the mounting debts from Tyler's specialized therapies and private school considerations that were straining her resources beyond what she had admitted, while my mother interjected with soothing promises that the house sale would resolve everything without specifying the full scope of involvement, a discovery that crystallized the depth of their enabling patterns and forced me into a profound dilemma whether to burst back into the dining room and demand transparency, risking the immediate shattering of the children's holiday spirit, or to bide my time gathering evidence to protect our interests, a decision that some might view as coldly strategic to the point of neglecting the emotional immediacy of family confrontation, but one born from the hard lessons of my divorce, where premature outbursts had only prolonged the pain without yielding resolution. Returning to the table, I diffused the lingering awkwardness by sharing an animated account of Jack's recent soccer victory, highlighting his determination in outmaneuvering older opponents through sheer hustle and teamwork without relying on external advantages, a tale delivered with genuine pride that subtly underscored the resilience of my own children in contrast to the coddled path afforded to Tyler, causing my mother to shift uncomfortably in her seat, Emily to offer a strained smile, and my father to clear his throat in evident discomfort as the praise hung in the air like a gentle rebuke, illuminating the favoritism they had normalized for so long. It served as my understated revenge, a witty redirection that shamed the bias, without descending into acrimony, providing a satisfying undercurrent of empowerment as I ruffled Jack's hair and declared him my little champion, watching the dynamics subtly recalibrate around the table even if the larger conflicts simmered unresolved beneath the surface. Yet the evening's revelations cast a long shadow over the drive home, where Mia's innocent query about why Grandma's stories always centered on Tyler prompted a fumbling explanation from me about varying family perspectives that left me inwardly chastising my divided attention between work demands and home front battles for not addressing these patterns sooner. And upon arriving, I delved into the garage, sorting through dusty boxes of stored mementos in search of some semblance of closure, only to unearth a yellowed legal document nestled among faded holiday cards, the co-ownership agreement for the family home, complete with official stamps and marginal notes that included Emily's name struck through alongside cryptic annotations about future considerations that hinted at maneuvers conducted entirely behind my back, sending a chill through me as I pondered the potential threats this posed, not just to our financial security, but to the very foundations of trust that had already begun to erode within our circle. That yellowed legal document became an inescapable fixture on my kitchen table for the ensuing days, a silent sentinel that amplified every creak of doubt in my mind as I pondered the implications of my co-ownership stake in the family home and the ominous marginal notes referencing Emily's involvement, suggesting a web of financial entanglements that could jeopardize not only our equity, but the stability I had meticulously built for Mia and Jack through years of disciplined budgeting and overlooked personal sacrifices in the wake of Tom's departure to Chicago, where he chased promotions while leaving me to navigate single parenthood with a resolve that bordered on exhaustion. Work provided scant respite as a major presentation loomed on the horizon, one that held the promise of a significant promotion and the accompanying salary boost needed to fund the kids' extracurriculars without constant financial juggling. Yet my concentration fractured repeatedly with visions of the house slipping away to bail out Emily's latest crisis, prompting me to confide in my neighbor Karen during a hurried coffee break one crisp morning, she having weathered her own familial tempests, including a contentious divorce and sibling disputes that left her wiser in the arts of boundary setting, and she advised me without mincing words to consult a lawyer discreetly to affirm my rights and prepare for the inevitable pushback, because in her experience, playing the long game often proved more effective than explosive confrontations that scattered alliances irreparably. Her counsel resonated deeply, as I had long viewed myself as the backbone of our family structure, the one who absorbed shocks without complaint, much like the resilient women in my Midwestern community, who balanced careers and childcare while enduring the subtle erosions of generational expectations. Yet even backbones could fracture under sustained pressure, and as I mulled over her words during the drive home that afternoon, the lines between tolerance and self-preservation began to sharpen into something unyielding. The invitation for a Mayup barbecue arrived via my mother's call midweek, her voice dripping with contrived warmth as she outlined the casual gathering at their home, designed to heal the rifts exacerbated by recent events, complete with promises of the kids' favorite grilled favorites and games in the yard. But I detected the underlying agenda, an attempt to address the savings discrepancy and soften my stance on the holiday cancellation, all while reinforcing their narrative of familial duty that placed Emily's needs paramount. Emily contributed to the overture through a series of texts laced with remorseful apologies intertwined with subtle requests for occasional babysitting, so she could pursue job interviews amid her mounting responsibilities, a plea that tugged at my sense of sisterly solidarity, even as it underscored the patterns of dependency that had defined our relationship since childhood, when I covered for her tardiness at school while she charmed her way out of consequences. I accepted the barbecue invitation, but stipulated clear boundaries, no discussions of the house or finances, and a focus on neutral interactions to prevent the event from devolving into another arena for favoritism. And as the day arrived under a Sky heavy with the threat of summer showers, the atmosphere crackled with anticipation. My parents bustling around the backyard with Dad at the grill flipping burgers and hot dogs, while Mom arranged salads and desserts in her signature style of domestic orchestration that masked deeper manipulations. Emily arrived fashionably late with Tyler in tow, his fussiness from teething evident in his whimpers, yet she scooped him up protectively when he toddled toward Mia and Jack's impromptu game of tag, snatching a ball from Jack's grasp and cooing reassurances that elicited a pointed glance from my mother, who remarked offhandedly that boys would be boys in their exuberant ways, a comment that nearly drew a wry retort from me about entitled princes inheriting kingdoms built on others' labors, but I held my tongue, channeling the irritation into polite engagement as the group settled around the picnic table laden with food. Tensions simmered beneath the surface pleasantries until midway through the meal, when my father drew me aside near the garden shed, his voice lowered to a conspiratorial rumble as he elaborated on the practicality of downsizing the house, framing it as a mutual benefit that would alleviate Emily's strains from unexpected medical bills for Tyler and allow for a more manageable lifestyle in their later years, a pitch that glossed over the fact that my co-signature tied my financial future to their decisions and implied I should acquiesce for the greater good, much like the dutiful daughter they had molded me into through years of praise for my independence, juxtaposed against Emily's fragility. The dilemma crystallized in that shaded corner: forgive the encroachments and risk further erosion of my autonomy, potentially exposing Mia and Jack to more instability, or expose the manipulations with the document in hand and fracture the family facade, irreparably, a choice that outsiders might criticize as unforgiving, especially given the blood ties and shared history, but one I recognized as essential for modeling strength to my children, who deserved a mother who prioritized their security over performative harmony. Rather than erupting, I nodded thoughtfully, allowing him to presume his persuasion had taken hold, and later, when Emily approached me privately near the dessert table seeking a direct loan from the family resources for Tyler's escalating daycare costs, I countered with a blend of empathy and irony, suggesting that fairness dictated matching contributions, perhaps by having her offset Mia's upcoming dance recital fees, since true family support flowed in all directions, a witty maneuver that caught her off guard, causing her to stammer excuses, while my mother, who overheard the exchange, flushed with the realization that the spotlight of equity had swung uncomfortably toward their biases, delivering a satisfying undercurrent of retribution without descending into outright conflict. As the group dynamics shifted subtly, with Emily withdrawing into subdued silence. Unexpectedly, the afternoon took a turn when my cousin Mark materialized at the edge of the yard, uninvited, but drawn by whispers through the extended family grapevine, the black sheep of our lineage, who had distanced himself years earlier following a bitter dispute over inheritance matters with my uncle. Yet now he approached with a purposeful stride, pulling me aside for a hushed conversation where he revealed fragments of overheard discussions about the house deal, including Emily's consultations with attorneys to explore loopholes in the ownership structure, advising me urgently to scrutinize the documents more thoroughly and consider allying against the tide of favoritism that had marginalized us both in the past. His offer of support from the fringes of the family tree introduced a layer of complexity I had not anticipated, shifting potential alliances in ways that made me question the loyalties I had long assumed immutable. And as the gathering wound down with the kids roasting marshmallows under the fading light, I felt the weight of uncertainty pressing heavier, the barbecue's forced conviviality giving way to introspection about whether this olive branch from Mark signaled a broader reckoning or merely another complication in the brewing storm. Driving home later with Jack dozing in the back seat and Mia humming softly to the radio, I gripped the steering wheel tightly, the echoes of my initial pack-up declaration resonating anew as a harbinger of impending action. And just as we turned onto our street, my phone illuminated with a text from Emily, its contents urgent and laced with desperation. "We need to talk for real this time," the words hanging like a precipice that promised to reveal her endgame or propel mine into motion, leaving me to wonder if the moment of true departure had finally arrived. The lawyer's office carried the scent of polished oak and fresh legal pads, a sanctuary of structured clarity that contrasted sharply with the chaotic undercurrents of my family life as I sat across from Ms. Hargrove, a sharp-eyed professional in her Mid-50s whose no-nonsense demeanor cut through the fog of my uncertainties when I presented the yellow document. She examined it with the precision of a surgeon dissecting layers of fine print to uncover the veto power embedded in my co-ownership clause, a remnant from the refinance I had co-signed years ago to aid my parents' mortgage approval, granting me not just equity, but the authority to block any unilateral sale or encumbrance without my consent, and as she outlined the path forward, a quiet title search followed by formal notifications to assert my position. She emphasized that this was more than protecting assets. It represented a reclamation of agency from the patterns of deference that had defined my role within the family for decades, a perspective that empowered me even as doubts swirled about whether wielding this leverage would ultimately mend the fractures or deepen them irreparably for Mia and Jack, who deserved a legacy untainted by generational favoritism. Armed with her guidance and a stack of advisory letters, I returned to the fray that week, the air thick with escalating urgency as my mother's calls evolved from pleading to frantic, laced with hints of desperation about Emily's worsening situation, while my father left voicemails grumbling about ingratitude and the erosion of family bonds that he attributed to my recent withdrawals, a barrage that tested my resolve, but also solidified my determination to confront the manipulations head-on rather than allowing them to erode the foundations I had built through late nights at the office and weekend budgeting sessions that prioritized my children's futures over performative peace. Emily's desperate text from the barbecue lingered unresolved until she appeared on my doorstep one overcast afternoon, her makeup streaked from unshed tears and Tyler mercifully napping at a sitter's so we could speak freely, and as I ushered her into the kitchen for a pot of chamomile tea to temper the rawness of the impending exchange, she finally unburdened herself in a torrent of confessions, revealing not just the surface-level strains of her divorce, but the deeper quagmire of debts accrued from her ex-husband's hidden gambling habits that had drained their joint accounts long before the separation, leaving her reliant on our parents' interventions to maintain the facade of stability for Tyler's sake, of vulnerability that evoked a pang of sisterly compassion, because beneath her entitled veneer Emily grappled with genuine fears of failure. Yet, as she pivoted to the house, suggesting that its sale could alleviate her burdens without fully disclosing the extent of her consultations with attorneys, I felt the weight of years of imbalance pressing down, compelling me to slide the legal document across the table and invite her to absorb its implications, the co-ownership details stark and unyielding that positioned me as the gatekeeper against such schemes. Her face paled as realization dawned, protests tumbling forth about the necessities of Tyler's needs and the moral imperative of family aid, but I interjected calmly with that signature smile honed in negotiations, declaring that the era of packing up expectations in favor of one child's comfort at the expense of others had concluded, and we were charting a new course where equity meant accountability for all, a witty encapsulation of my stance that blended empathy with firmness, causing her to crumple slightly as she absorbed the finality of my refusal to enable further. The family summit convened that evening in my living room, a charged assembly where my parents arrived with Emily in tow, their expressions a mix of indignation and apprehension as accusations flew about betrayal and selfishness, with Dad thundering over the perceived sabotage of their retirement plans, Mom dissolving into tears over the dissolution of traditions that had bound us, and Emily clutching at pleas for understanding, while Tyler's absence mercifully spared the children from the spectacle. Yet Mia and Jack peered down from the staircase, their wide eyes reflecting the confusion of witnessing their mother's unyielding front, a sight that twisted my heart, because in choosing this confrontation over capitulation I risked imprinting them with the scars of division rather than the warmth of unblemished unity, a dilemma that might strike some as ruthlessly pragmatic, bordering on emotional neglect in the name of justice, but one I embraced as the only path to modeling true strength amid the inequities they had already endured. I presented the lawyer's letter with composed authority, redirecting the entirety of the shared savings into irrevocable trusts for Mia and Jack's education, while advising them to seek independent counsel for Emily's support, emphasizing that love persisted, but boundaries ensured its health, a declaration delivered without vitriol yet laced with the ironic humor of turning their comfort narrative against them, as I quipped that perhaps Tyler's future stability could begin with lessons in shared Responsibility rather than inherited privileges, causing a stunned silence that rippled through the room before they departed in a haze of awkward embraces and vague promises of reflection, leaving the space feeling both liberated and hollow. As the door clicked shut, the reckoning settled over me like a hard-won exhale, the weight of confrontation lifting to reveal a clearer horizon, yet ambiguities clouded the victory, because while I had dismantled the immediate threats, the emotional ripples extended far beyond property lines, with Mia's thoughtful questions later that night about whether Grandma would still visit and Jack's quiet clinginess hinting at the subtle impacts of the upheaval on their sense of security, prompting me to wonder if my calculated revenges had fortified our independence or merely transplanted the resentments to new soil. The following afternoon, as I loaded the kids into the car for a spontaneous drive to the lake, a neutral escape to process the shifts, we drove away from the house that had become a symbol of contested ground, my phone buzzing once more with a tentative message from Emily apologizing profusely and inquiring if we could attempt rebuilding on fairer terms, followed closely by a call from Mark, offering ongoing alliance in navigating the aftermath, a convergence that left me pausing at a stoplight, the enigmatic smile returning as I pondered the vines of family ties that twisted unpredictably, whether this marked the true end of our entanglements or merely the prelude to unforeseen growth and thorns in the seasons ahead.